Hey everybody, it's your old pal Wood Doofus here. We are making a bookshelf today, and I've already processed one sheet of plywood. Now this is for a family member, and they've asked it to be a stained bookshelf. So I have oak veneered plywood here, so it'll take the stain better than any cheaper plywood. And I've already ripped the sheet of plywood down, and I actually made a video about the new tool that I use to rip it down, so check that out if you haven't seen it already. I only wanted to do this with one sheet of plywood, so I have two panels that are 6 feet by 12 inches, and I have 6 panels that are 12 inches by 3 feet, and that is a rough dimension. There'll be a little bit of tweaking on that one. I actually needed 7 panels, so I'm going to use a piece of plywood that I have in the shop to make up the difference, where it won't be too noticeable if it doesn't match perfectly. It's important to remember there's an A side and a B side to most plywoods. You want to find the less quality side, or the B side, and make that the inside of the cabinet. And the better looking side, you want to make that the A side on the outside of the cabinet. I've cut my top, middle, and bottom pieces to size already. Basically, I have a 36-inch wide bookcase, and these 3 pieces are going to sit in between the 2 sides, which are 3/4 inch material. So these are 34.5, and I have a 3/16 inch backer board that's going to sit there. So I went ahead and ripped down 3/16 inch less than the side pieces. I'm going to want to connect this top with pocket holes and glue, so I'm going to go ahead and screw 3 or 4 along the top of my top piece. Now I got it on hammer setting. I've recently invested in some of these vice grip clamps, and they've been invaluable when putting together bookcases and otherwise boxes like this. Craig makes these, but they're probably twice the price. I just found these on Amazon. I'll put a link in the description. They basically fit into the pocket holes, and you can go ahead and clamp a couple of them to keep it in place. Put the 2 other screws in. Then you just take the clamps off and put the 2 screws where the clamps are holding it, and you're good to go. Idiot. For the bottom, I made these 2 stretchers, and they're gonna basically be underneath the bottom shelf and give some space between the bottom shelf and the floor. And they're gonna be covered up by trim, so it's not a problem. And I'm attaching these with pocket holes also. Alright, so my audio stopped working, so I'm just going to do a little voiceover here. All I'm doing is attaching the bottom shelf with some glue and eventually some pin nails. I'm just going to go ahead and pop the shelf in there, even though I screwed up that glue line, as you can see. I'm just going to put a minimum number of pin nails in here, and then just let the glue do its job. That way I don't have a lot of holes to fill later on. These are actually the only pin nails I use. So I have a 6-foot bookshelf, and the shelves were 3 feet, so I went ahead and used those as spacers for the fixed middle shelf. So I just put the glue on there, and I pop the middle shelf in, and then I go ahead and attach that with the same system I've been using, pocket hole screws with these vice clamps, and I just go ahead and screw them in on both sides. You can't really see what I'm doing, so I tried to change the camera angle eventually. That is my bald head getting the job done. And I think I'm going to, yeah, there we go. I changed the camera angle there. I am pointing at holes. Take these out. Take the clamps off. Take the shelf out. And the shelf is in place. So like I said earlier, all my shelves that I've pre-installed are inset from the back of the bookcase. And that is to make sure there's room to accept the back panel without it sticking out. But I also need to rabbet out this edge right here so that the panel can sit along the edge too without wanting to bend on the inside. So I have a rabbeting bit in my palm router here, and it basically guides with this ball bearing along the edge of the shelf and cuts out a little bit of a rabbet for me. And the last thing I got to deal with for the back panel is about 4 sections where I need to get my chisel just to get the corners here. Here's another example right here where I got to chisel that out. There it goes. Yeah. All right, so I just cut the back panel. Let's make sure it fits. All right, so I would say that that mostly fits. Everything makes contact that needs to. It's not perfect, but I never do anything perfect. I don't want to attach the back right now because I want to stain all these pieces separately. Also, I'm considering making some more stretchers that go underneath the top shelf and maybe underneath the middle shelf just for extra support and also extra contact for the backing board. All right, so I found these 2 extra cutoffs of oak plywood from previous projects, so I'm going to go ahead and just use these for the stretchers that I want. I'll just use pocket holes again. So this is a good time to put the shelf pin holes in while I still have both sides open. And I'm using this Craig shelf pin jig. It's really useful, not very expensive. I'm going to put a link in the description below. Make sure you check that out. Basically it has these set holes and you can put them in every hole or you put them in every other hole, whatever you want to do. And I'm going to have 2 adjustable shelves on each one of these bays that's in the bookshelf. And it's just up to me how far apart I want the holes to be. So I usually just butt it up against the bottom and go ahead and drill the first hole here. The kit comes with this stop that you can put on a brad point drill bit. The brad points are the best ones to use for this to make a nice clean hole. And then you just drill the hole down to the stop. Once you got your first shelf pin hole, you go ahead and get your little pin here and put it and move your jig up. It has a lip on this side to make sure the distance of your holes is consistent from the edge. So once you have your pin in the first hole that you drilled, you go ahead and drill consistent distances all the way up as far as you want to go. So once you have all the holes consistently drilled on one side, you want to make sure they match on the other side. So you go ahead and take the pin out and you can slide this thing off. It's a little sticky. It's a lot sticky. There we go. And you put it on the other side. At that point, you're ready to go ahead and start on the other side with consistent distances. And that should be all the pins I need for this side. I'll just do the other side now. All right, now that the main carcass is assembled, I think it's a good time to stop and do a light sanding on the surface to make sure it takes the stain well at the end of the day. But I won't make you watch that because it's a horrific thing. I'm using 220 grit sandpaper. You don't want to use anything too coarse because you don't want to take off the veneer of this oak plywood. I just cut up the face frame out of 3/4 inch oak and I'm gonna connect it with pocket holes before I put it on there. I also still need the cross piece that goes on the middle shelf, but I want to clamp this part on there first and then make sure I mark it precisely where that middle shelf will go so it matches up with where the shelf is. To help prevent splitting this wood when I put the pocket hole in, I just reverse the drill for a little while. I don't know if it works, but people say it works. I also tried casting a voodoo spell on it. That worked too. So I clamped the face frame on there and I cut a piece of 1.5 inch material to go over that middle shelf. And I made sure to really sneak up on that cut so it'll fit super tight. And that way I know it's not going to screw up anything, you know, whatever. I just put the glue on the face frame. Now it's time to clamp it on there. So it's all clamped on there. I most likely will put more clamps on here. I might even put some pin nails in here, but I want to minimize that because it's a stain project and it's harder to patch those nail holes up. Also, I have some glue squeeze out and I need to get a wet rag as soon as I can, wipe up that glue squeeze out because that will affect the stain also if it doesn't get completely off. So while the glue is drying and it's all clamped up, I need to cut my 4 shelves. These are the adjustable shelves to their final dimension. Now these are just 12 inches by 36 right now. And what I have is these inside pieces are 34.5, but I just inserted all my shelf pins, and that basically represents about 1/8 of an inch on either side. So I need to start with 34.5 minus 1/4 of an inch, and then it'll probably still be extra tight, and then I just need to trim it from there. And then I need to make sure it's the right depth. Okay, so I've been assembling these shelves and I decided to make a little edge profile on these. And this is the fixed shelf, which I put the edge profile on also. But let me show you the simple process for putting these shelves together. The first thing I do is drill 5 pocket holes on the B side of it, and that's going to be the underneath. And the reason I use pocket holes is because I don't want to put pin nails in the front because we're staining it. And I bring it over to my assembly station and I start to assemble it. The most important thing is to clamp the whole system before you start screwing in the pocket holes so they have a good tight connection. So once the glue dries a little bit, I just flip it over and then I'm ready to do my profile. I'm using a Roman OG bit, but I sank it down so it just does the cove part of the bit. It's about 1/4 inch. All right, so I took a risk. I took the clamps off of here. The glue should be set. It's been like 6 hours, but overnight it should fully cure. But I'm gonna go ahead and try to sand it. So I'm gonna start with a 220 disc. No, I'm not. I'm gonna start with a 120 disc to make sure I get some of these burn marks off of there. And then I'm gonna go to 220. And then I'm gonna get that OG bit and do the profile on the side trim too. And it should look really good after that. Last night I was able to stain it up before I finished up for the day. And the staining process was pretty simple. I used this stain right here. It is red mahogany. I don't know how this looks like mahogany, but that's what it's called. This is a gel stain, so I painted it on with a sponge brush, and then I just took a clean cloth, it was super clean by the time I was done with it, and wiped it off after it was sitting for, a few seconds. So when I got up today, all I had to do was the polyurethane, and I made a big mistake. I had a gallon of polyurethane that I recently bought, and I put 2 coats on there and realized it doesn't look very shiny, and it turns out I had bought matte polyurethane, which really sucked. So I had to go to the store and buy glossy polyurethane because I like it glossy. So the last thing left to do is to staple the back panel on, and let's get that done. Since I drilled 1/4 inch holes for the shelf pins, I went ahead and got 1/4 inch shelf pins. Make sure you don't mix them up with the 5mm. All right, so that about wraps it up for this bookshelf. It turned out really well. I really like adding the cove on there. It gives it that little bit of trim without even adding any trim. All I have on here is a face frame and still has a little bit of fancy in there. Everybody wants a little bit of fancy. There were a few issues that I ran into. I will say there were some marks on some of the wood that didn't show up until after the stain. One thing you can do about that is to sand it as good as you can and make sure to not have any glue squeeze out and all that kind of stuff. But also when you're buying the plywood, just take your time and look for one that doesn't have any scratches or anything like that. Otherwise, I always appreciate you guys watching. Make sure to check the links in the description for some of the tools that I use if you're interested. It really helps out the channel. Besides that, as always, don't be afraid to be a doofus.